We're going to be covering both LSAT prep and finding an attorney mentor. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And I'm joined by my good friend, Anjie V. How you doing, Anjie?
Hi there. Hi, everybody. So my name's Anjie. I run a company called Leg Up Legal, and we provide a mentoring platform that connects pre-law students to attorneys for mentoring so they can figure out what the practice of law is all about before they dive in and start applying and taking the LSAT and all that good stuff.
Awesome. Great. So I'm really excited for our discussion tonight. We'll do this as a two-parter. First part on LSAT prep, next part on the attorney mentoring. So let's dive in. A lot of recent changes to talk about.
Yeah, well, I've got a ton of questions for you, Steve, because I'll tell you, the game has changed since I went to law school. So, now the LSAT's gone digital, and I'm sure, a lot of people have the same questions I do. But now I also saw that there's way more test dates than there used to be. So can you tell me, when do you recommend that students start taking the LSAT?
Yeah, there are a lot more test dates than there used to be. It's gone from being 4 times a year to as many as 9 or 10 times a year.
That's crazy.
But, yeah, it's really nuts. But that's nice because there's always another test date just around the corner.
Yeah.
As far as when to take the LSAT, it's really whenever you're ready. Scores are good for 5 years. So if you have a lot of free time over the summer, you can study over the summer, take it in the fall.
But now, is it still the way that it used to be where you might not get your score back until the registration deadline for the next test might have passed already? Because I know that snuck up on me once.
Correct. So, yeah, that's entirely possible. Even though the LSAT's gone digital, you still have to wait 3 weeks to get your score back. I know it's crazy. They should be able to tell you instantly, but due to some analyses they do on their end, they want to make sure everything's up to snuff. So they crunch the numbers and then get back to you. But my take is it's worth registering for the next test just in case, to have that, because it gives you peace of mind before going in. Let's say you are registered for February, but maybe you're going to want to take March also. Register for March, and that way you have secured the option to take it in March. So that way, if February doesn't go well, you've got the backup.
Yeah, and do they refund it if you cancel by a certain date or no?
There are partial refunds. LSAC loves their money. They love those fees. So they will give you a partial refund if you postpone before the deadline. And then if you withdraw, then you don't get anything back. But at least law schools will never even know that you were registered for that additional test date.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you recommend that students study for the LSAT now? I mean, since it is digital, should they be taking it on tablets or should they be, doing books? I mean, we were old school. We just used the books.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used only books, of course. But the thing is that although the LSAT has gone digital, most of the exams published by LSAC are in paper form. So I'd say do a lot of your work out of the books, but do at least a few exams in the digital format. And LSAC has generously put 3 out of about 100 exams in the digital format. So you got a 3% digital conversion rate there.
Oh,
exams
man.
71, 73, and 74 are in the digital format on LSAC's site at familiar.lsac.org. And most of the rest are available in books of 10 on Amazon for about $20 each.
And is there any way that the students can actually get a hold of, one of the Surface Go's to try it out before the test or no?
Yeah, I mean, you can go out and buy a Microsoft Surface Go tablet if you want. I think any old tablet's perfectly fine, though. So if you already have an iPad, if you already have an Amazon Fire tablet, those are perfectly good substitutes. The idea is just to really get a sense of what the feel is like to walk through the digital LSAT with the touch screen and all the interactive features and such.
Okay. So I know a lot of students are probably going to be applying, right now, since it's January still. I think, probably wasn't there just an administration here in early January, I thought?
Yeah, there was.
So, how should people be preparing for the LSAT if they're like in the home crunch, if they're in their final few weeks of studying?
Yeah, so let's say you're taking the LSAT about 1 month from now. There's a test date about a month from now. I would focus on full-length timed exams and detailed review of those exams. And I've got here for you Steve's LSAT practice test rule. That is maximum 2 tests per week, minimum 2 hours reviewing each test. Most students don't review enough. And the real value in doing these exams is in having the opportunity to make mistakes so that you can figure out what you need to work on and you have material to analyze in depth. So review those problems.
Okay. And is there anything special that they should do to prepare for the digital LSAT in particular?
Well, practice on the tablet if you can. Do at least a few exams in that format. And for the rest, treat your books like screens. Don't write on them. Do all your work on scratch paper to the side. And if you happen to have access to the PDFs of the old exams, you could also load those up on your computer screen or tablet to at least mimic the idea of looking at a screen while you work and doing all your note-taking and diagramming to the side.
Okay, that's a great idea. So are there any new changes to the LSAT this year that students should keep in mind?
Well, the biggest change is just simply the fact that it's gone digital. And that's, of course, a format, like a content delivery change, not the nature of the content itself.
Sure.
But a handful of recent changes. In June 2007, they switched to having a dual or comparative reading comprehension passage. Rather than 4 long passages, it's 3 long and 2 short. And that change was over 10 years ago. But I just talked to somebody today, actually, who had been studying the older exams, those numbered in the 40s and 30s, that do not have this change. And so you want to make sure that, of course, you're looking at more recent exams, those especially numbered in the 70s and 80s. Another big change is that starting with the Prep Test 57, which was in 2009, they added a rule substitution or rule equivalency question in logic games. So basically drill those questions, do a bunch of questions, games containing that question specifically. You guys, a drill, just do only that question from each of those games. Just get a sense of what it's like, because it's not necessarily harder, but it is different. And when you only see it occasionally, that's what makes it scary.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the whole LSAT's scary.
Yeah, believe me, everybody feels that way.
It's not just the stuff that's occasional. But so are there, now that the test is offered so often, are there limits on how often you can take it?
Yeah, it's funny because there actually weren't any limits for a while, but LSAC realized that they can't produce 10 totally new tests per year. It cost them over $750,000 to produce a single test form.
Yeah.
So to go from making 4 of those a year or 3 of them a year to making 10 of them a year, they just can't ramp up that quickly. So what they do is they reuse old unreleased exams. Because they are reusing all these old exams time and time again, if they didn't have any limit on the number of times you could take it, you could take it all 10 times each year and then see the same questions again, and of course get boosted up as a result of that. So they want to limit the potential overlap. So what's the
limit now?
So the new limit is 3 times in one testing cycle. Testing cycles run from June to May of the following year. So 3 times in one cycle, 5 times in 5 years, and 7 times for life. And if you get a 180, you can't take it again.
Oh, well, why would you?
Why would you, except for bragging rights?
Yeah, well, or you risk getting a lower score, right?
Maybe. So those are the limits. These don't really affect hardly anybody. I don't love that there are limits because since law schools don't average multiple scores, it only benefits you to retake. If you do worse, no big deal. If you get a boost, even through luck alone, that only helps your chances. And the average person, there's a margin of error or score band of 3.5 points on each end. So if you deserve a 160, you might get a 160, but you might get a 163 or 164. And obviously, a 164 opens far more doors than a 160 would.
Yeah.
So it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I know you said that they don't average the scores anymore, but I mean, if you have a huge jump in your score, do you still recommend, explaining that on your application, or how do you handle that? If you have, your first score that you took, you think was totally unrepresentative of what your capabilities are. And, maybe your first score was a 145 and your next score is a 168. And how do you handle the lower score?
Yeah, I've talked with a lot of admissions officers about this, and honestly, their answers vary. I feel like a lot of them will say, just go ahead, write an addendum if he makes you feel good, because people feel the need to explain things like that. And I get the impulse, like it is a question, but at the same time, the numbers are the numbers. So let's say if you took it a couple times and didn't get a score that you wanted, their answer would just be retake. Or you could say, my my undergraduate GPA is higher than my SAT scores would have led you to expect. So therefore, I'm not a good test taker, but my GPA is higher than you would think. So trust I will do well in law school despite that. But a lower followed by a higher, I mean, you got the higher number. That's what they really care about. So my inclination is to say, don't bother in a case like that unless you really have a good reason. If you want to say like the day I took it the first time, my grandma was sick or something like that, you know, or I wasn't
or there
feeling
was
well.
some weird anomaly with the test or
Exactly. Or like there was like a digital LSAT tech issue. You could say that if you want to, and they'll be like, yeah, okay, fine. But then ultimately getting the higher numbers is what really matters.
Okay. All right. So, and what about the new LSAT writing? I know that there's a new format for that too. So tell us a little bit about what that's like.
Yeah, so the LSAT writing is now digital, meaning you're no longer doing it at the test center anymore. You have up to 1 year to complete it from your own device after the test. So let's say you're registered for the February LSAT, you take it. At that moment that you take it, you can then go home after the test if you want to and log on right away and do it, or anytime later. And because it's typed, law school admission officers are more likely to look at it because handwriting issues are no longer a concern. They can actually read what you type and benefit to you, their spell check, and you can probably type faster than you can write, and it's easier to edit. So don't do it the day of because your brain will be fried, but do it maybe a week later or so, but just don't forget to do it because they do want to see it.
Okay. But that's nice that you don't have to do it on the test day anymore.
Exactly. They just shortened test day by 35 minutes.
Yeah. Well, when your brain's already battered that much, you're thankful for the break. So
exactly.
And how do you recommend preparing for the LSAT writing?
Honestly, I don't recommend doing that much just because the scored portions of the LSAT are so much more important.
Yeah.
But since it is typed, maybe they'll look at it more. So especially if you're a non-native English speaker or if your grades in English in college weren't that great, you want to show them that you can write well. So I would say maybe do a practice writing sample or two and have somebody look at it. Bottom line is you want to make a well-reasoned, reasonable argument, choosing between two options, picking one, arguing in favor of it, acknowledging the weaknesses of your choice and the benefits of the other, but still strongly coming down on the side that you chose. That's pretty much it. I would just say do a couple if you like, have somebody look them over, give you feedback, but that's pretty much it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all those tips. If I have any LSAT questions, I'm definitely coming to you because it's been a long time since I had to take it. So
totally. And by the way, folks, feel free to ask questions in the chat here. There's a chat function here, and we will do whatever we can to work your questions into the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Let me open up that window so I can make sure to check it while we're doing my piece. So
yeah, sure. So anything LSAT or anything on Angie's side with the attorney mentoring or really anything else at all, we'll help you out if we can, or if not, we'll find out the answer and get back to you.
Yeah. So before I begin on my side, I just wanted to give a little introduction about what our program is about so that people understand, you know, what they can ask about. Sure. So basically, you know, we started a mentoring program to help prospective law students really connect with attorneys so that they could ask them all the questions that they're afraid to ask. So I think a lot of students, you know, jump straight into things like LSAT prep or, you know, how do I prepare academically for law school, but they don't really think about why they want to go to law school as much and what the practice of law is actually really like, which is ironic because I think that a lot of students, you know, in the back of their mind, they understand law school is about getting a job as a lawyer later on, but it's kind of far away. And so I think a lot of people don't really understand what is being a lawyer about. They think they know, maybe they've seen lawyers on TV, or maybe they've interacted with some lawyers time and again, but for the most part, most people shouldn't have had a lot of interactions with lawyers before law school, let's hope. So I think a lot of people just don't realize the vast breadth of the legal profession, how many different kinds of lawyers there are, and how different our jobs may be because of the types of lawyers that, or the types of law that we practice. And so it's really to give students a lot of exposure into all these different career paths, because the job of a corporate in-house lawyer looks really different from the job of a federal regulator or the job of a litigator. And I think it's really important for students to start connecting with lawyers really early on so that they can get a sense of that. Because even if you know one or two lawyers really well, that might not help you if they're not in the practice areas that you're interested in. So that's, basically what our program is for. And so, yeah, what questions do you have for me?
Awesome, Angie. So thanks for that introduction. I think it's really important and often too neglected that people say they want to go to law schools. They always love to argue, or they see lawyers on TV or in the movies, and everyone they know who happens to be a lawyer says to them, "Don't go to law school. Lawyers are miserable. And don't make my mistakes." But they're also like 50 years old, and maybe they're practicing a totally different area. So young folks who are looking to go to law school can't relate to that. They want to find someone who's practicing in their specific area, their dream area. Where do they go? Who do they turn to?
Yeah. So, I think one of the great tools that students should be using these days is LinkedIn. And I cannot drill this home enough, but I would have to say, despite the fact that so many people are getting on LinkedIn now, a lot of my mentees, I would say 40% of the mentees that join our program don't have a LinkedIn profile. And if you need to find lawyers, LinkedIn is where you go. If you're wondering, like, where are all the lawyers? How do I connect with them? Do I just open a phone book? Like, no, they're on LinkedIn. So get on to LinkedIn and start looking through attorneys that are in your geographical area. And then, message them, ask them, tell them, hey, I'm a prospective law student. I'm thinking about going to law school. I really want to learn more about your practice area because it seems really interesting, but I really want to get a sense of it before I decide to, focus my studies in this area. And, and I just saw in the chat, somebody asked, what questions should you be asking my mentor? That's awesome, because actually a ton of students don't really realize how to interact with a mentor. And so what we do in the mentoring program is we give them an actual plan. There's a career development plan with different mentoring objectives that you can choose from to work with your attorney on. And so that gives you a starting point on where to go. We also have an initial meeting plan. So when you meet with them, it'll explain, there's like a list of questions that you can ask them to get to know them better, and they can ask you to get to know you better so that you guys can interact. And I'm happy to actually send out that list of questions to everybody. So I can do that after the webinar. But, basically lawyers are just people. So you just want to, you want to ask them, how did you decide to go to law school? What was your journey like? And why did you pick this practice area? I don't know that many people who grew up like wanting to be a bankruptcy lawyer. So like, I'm always fascinated to hear from bankruptcy lawyers that are like obsessed with bankruptcy because I'm like, how did you get into bankruptcy? So I think it's really important to just ask them, what was your journey like? Because, there were a few people I went to law school with that always wanted to be a lawyer. They had a family friend that was a lawyer, or one of their parents was a lawyer, and they were like, I knew I was going to be a lawyer since I was 6. I was not one of those people, so I didn't think about going to law school until after I was even working in another career. So I was working in advertising, decided to switch to law school, and I had no idea what law was really all about. So I did what I could back then when we didn't have LinkedIn, and I actually did crack open a phone book and call people. And so I know you don't want to sound, dumb or stupid in front of a lawyer, but I promise you, all of them remember what it was like to be you. All of them remember what it was like when they didn't know anything about the law. And there's no stupid questions. I think one of the things that you'll learn when you go to law school is you have to be inquisitive. They always want you to ask questions, and you have to be able to stick your neck out there and risk looking a little silly if you ask the wrong question, but that's way better than not getting the answer. And if you join a program like ours, we'll provide you the materials that you need in order to interact with your mentors and engage with your mentors so that you don't feel like a fish out of water.
But what's that first step though? So like you go on LinkedIn, you do some like you type in the search field like lawyers in my city. You find them, you find someone who's maybe a bit young, a bit more approachable.
Mhm.
Maybe they went to the same college you did.
Yeah.
What do you say in that first message?
Yep. You introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Angie. I'm a prospective law student. I'm thinking about going to law school. I saw your LinkedIn profile and, I read about your practice area and I'm really interested in it. And actually go do your research on the practice area first and have an idea of what you want to ask them. And just mention, I thought these things were really interesting about your practice area. I would love to learn a little bit more. Do you have time for maybe a 30-minute call next week, or do you have time for a meeting, something like that. Set up some, lunch, coffee, or just a call if that's all they're willing to do. But I mean, I'll tell you, I've had students do this. They reach out to me through LinkedIn and I've never declined one. So, and my friends have had it too. I think all of us have had requests for meetings. And don't be afraid to do it. I think most people would be more than willing. I mean, if they're too busy, they'll usually tell you like, hey, I can't right now, but I will when my schedule frees up. But trust me, most lawyers would be more than willing to go to a meeting with you.
Okay, what's the benefit here? Because someone's already they already want to go to law school.
Yeah.
Is this person going to write a recommendation letter? Are they going to help them get into the law school and pull some strings, or are we just going to make the connection now and then circle back in 3 years when it's time to look for a job?
No, that's a great question. So you want to be building relationships with these attorneys. It's not going to do you any good to have one meeting with them and then never follow up with them again. They're not going to remember who you are by the time you get out of law school. I mean, I don't remember people I've met last month. So if you come back to me in 3 years and ask me for a job, I'm going to be like, who? So, you need to be building relationships with them. And that's why we recommend, doing something like a mentoring program. There are mentoring programs offered by some universities where they'll connect you to their alumni who might be lawyers, and you can interact with them that way. But basically, you want to be interacting with him frequently. And so that's why in our mentoring program, we have the plan where you pick 3 objectives. You're supposed to meet 1 to 2 times a month to accomplish each objective. So your initial term with the attorney will last about, anywhere from 1 month to 3 months, depending on which mentoring objectives you picked and how often you decided to meet with them. But I would suggest, even if you don't join our program, do that format with your mentor. When you talk to an attorney, don't just ask them straight out, like, can you be my mentor? Because they're not going to know what to work on with you. So get to know them first, build that rapport. In that first coffee meeting, ask them about, their journey, write down a few things that you thought were really interesting to you, things that you wanted to look up after, and, go out and do your research about that. And then come back to them and say like, oh, you mentioned this and this and this, and I thought that was really interesting, but I want to know more. Would you be willing to sort of help me learn more about this practice area and mentor me, for a few months while I learn more about what you do? I think most people would be really receptive to it. And if that particular attorney is not receptive to it, just reach out to another one. Don't be afraid. I literally, when I cold called attorneys out of a phone book, I called over 50 attorneys and I got shot down by every single one except for 3. So
wow.
The odds were not great back then. So I think now people are a lot more used to being approached by strangers. So I think you'll be okay. I'm looking at some of these other questions in here. So how can you join the program? So go to leguplegal.com and go to the mentoring page and it'll tell you all about it. Any tips on what type of internships that we should have? Actually, no, I don't think that's out of the scope at all, because I'll actually tell you this. Some of the attorneys that are in our program develop such good relationships with the students, they actually do hire them as interns later. So that's not out of the scope. But I recommend doing your research on the practice areas you're interested in first. Then you can start looking for internships. But I will tell you this, internships at the prospective law student level are very rare. There are some, but they're very competitive. You're better off doing like a fellowship program, or, you know, if your school has some sort of special internship program with it, you know, law firms do those. But I will tell you, there's a few of them that I know of, and actually my intern and I compiled a whole list of them, so I can send that out as well. So let me make some notes.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. People are always looking for that sort of thing.
There's like a Google spreadsheet of all of the ones that we know of. So let me send out that, fellowships and internships. And, okay.
It sounds like the idea here is really just creating this regular relationship with the attorney over time and deepening that relationship over time. Somebody's asking about like what questions to be asking their mentor. And it sounds to me like it's really whatever interests you, but it's not so much about the fact that what questions you ask as the nature of the relationship you develop with them over time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to realize, like, don't just go into it and, you know, interview them like you're interviewing somebody for a job. Like, don't just, you know, be like, what can I get out of this? You know, go into it like caring about who this person is as a person. You know, I mean, like, ask them, you know, what considerations did you have when you were going to law school? What will you have done differently? You know, every single attorney out there, I guarantee you, has things they would have done differently. So, you know, I think it's really important for people to get to know their mentor, well, get to know the attorney before they even go forth and ask them to be a mentor. In our initial meeting, we asked them to, you know, ask a whole bunch of background questions before they decide which objectives to even work on with the mentor. Because if you think that you want to learn a lot about litigation, and then through your conversation with your mentor, you find out like, oh yeah, they were a litigator, you know, 7 years ago, but actually right now, you know, all they do is like corporate transactional law, then you're like, oh, maybe, you know, I want to match somebody else to work on this particular objective. So I think it's important to really get a sense of who they are before you, you know, hammer out like, what can they actually help me with? And don't forget to like do things that are just basic and courteous. You know, if you schedule a meeting with your mentor and you have to cancel, don't just ghost them, you know, please, because that will make those attorneys not ever talk to you again. So, and the legal profession is actually really small. So if you rub somebody the wrong way, there's a good chance that might come around in the future. So just, you know, just keep in mind, you know, if you schedule a meeting with somebody and you can't make it, that, you know, that happens to everybody, but just email them and be like, hey, I'm so sorry, this came up and I couldn't make it. Send them a thank you note, for Christ's sake. Send them a thank you note. After they do that coffee meeting with you or whatever it is, you know, send them a thank you note, because at least that's one more interaction that you're going to get with them, you know, and give a better impression. So there's tons of networking events that you can go to interact with attorneys. I am amazed that I didn't know as a pre-law student what a bar association was. I had no idea. Like, what are they? And bar associations are literally associations of lawyers, and they throw tons of events all the time. And most of them are open to law students. And I guarantee you, if you reach out to like the chair of whoever's throwing the event and ask them if you can come as a prospective law student, they'll say yes. And so, and I'm on the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers Association here in Dallas, and I'm able to, you know, invite students to our events. And so like, if you ever see anything that you want to go to, reach out to the chair of that event and just ask them, you know, hey, do you mind if I come? And even if there's a cost associated with it, most of the time they'll waive it for students. So
sweet.
Yeah. So go to those events, and that's where you'll meet lots of attorneys at once. And that might seem overwhelming for some people, so that's why I recommend kind of the LinkedIn approach first, because throwing yourself in a room full of lawyers may be a little overwhelming at times. But, you know, I think you build up to it. You know, you start reaching out to attorneys, you learn more about, you know, what being an attorney is all about. And then once you feel comfortable that you have that base knowledge that you need, to, you know, have a conversation with any attorney that comes up to you, then start going to networking events and introducing yourself and collecting cards. And yeah, I mean, I really underestimated how much networking I should have been doing as a potential law student. I was like, oh, I'll wait to do that when I get into law school. And it is never too early to start connecting with lawyers. You should be connecting with them now. And here's why. I think people don't realize the value in this because they're like, oh, well, I know a lawyer who told me that he just figured out what kind of law he wanted to practice when he was in law school. He came out just fine. Yes, sure, there are those cases, but what you really don't want is to be really interested in a certain practice area and you like find that out in law school, and then you find out that your law school doesn't have any programs in that area. So for example, I have a mentee that he went to Baylor Law School, and Baylor here in Texas is known as a litigation-focused school. It's really focused on, anything court-related. It does not focus a lot on transactional practice. And if you don't know the difference between litigation and transactional, that's totally fine. I can explain that too, but in a second. So he wanted to practice trademark and copyright law, which is what I practiced. And he reached out to me because he said it's really hard for him to connect with attorneys through Baylor's network because most of them are litigators. And so, I helped him network with other people around Dallas and eventually get his job, his summer associateship job, and now his first year associate position. So I think it's really important to realize, like, if you're at a school and they don't have any programs in the practice area you want to be in, it's going to be really hard to market yourself as the student that knows everything about that practice area. I knew I wanted to do trademark law before I went to law school. So I only applied to law schools that had a trademark focus or a copyright focus. And I'll tell you, my law school had 11 different classes in trademark and copyright, where most law schools have like 2. So, we also had clinics and all these, opportunities to get a lot of real practice experience. And we had these externships with a lot of our alums, at really coveted places like Coach and Under Armour and General Electric and all these companies that, lots of people would die to get jobs in. And so I think it's really important to realize that the whole purpose of networking with attorneys is to learn more about their particular practice area. And if it's a really niche practice area that you become interested in, you need to realize that not every law school is going to offer those programs. And so you should be more targeted about which law schools you're applying to in order to make sure you can get the right experience.
That's really interesting because of how it connects to the admission side of things. Like, these are questions to be asking at all these law school fairs or contacting admission offices, because people assume that every law school teaches the exact same curriculum to prepare you for the bar, but it sounds like they actually vary quite a bit in what they offer.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, for trademark in particular, they had these moot court competitions, and the moot court competition that I went to is not offered and does not have teams at every school. And I've often heard of people who really, really wanted to participate in this particular moot court because it's really well known, and their school doesn't have a team. And so it's really important. One of the things that I think students really don't understand is that the core curriculums of law schools might be very similar, but the actual stuff that's going to set you apart from all the other students is going to be really different. And that's going to really change how you market yourself when you go to get a job. So that's why it's really important to talk to lawyers and find out, what law schools do you even hire from? Like, I would ask them that. Like, one of the attorneys that I connected with before I went to law school, I asked him that. And he gave me a list of like 8 schools. And he's like, these are the only schools that I actually think do a really good job in trademark and copyright law. And so I literally just took that list and applied to all 8 of those schools. That's how I picked law schools. So I think it's really important for you to do that, talk to attorneys and talk and see, what would they recommend you do before you dive into law school.
Yeah, it could actually dictate where you end up going to law school altogether, not just helping you afterwards.
Absolutely. And also thinking about, the geographic location that you want to be in before you go to pick your law school. Some people end up just like picking law schools based on cost. Some people just end up picking law schools based on like what's the school that I can get into. Some people just pick out, law schools based on the types of prestige that they have, or the level of prestige that they have. But, I think it's really important to know that there are certain law schools that have regional reputation as opposed to nationwide reputation. If you go to a T14 school, they're all going to have nationwide reputation. You can probably get a job in almost any market if you do pretty well. But if you go to a school like Southern Methodist University here in Dallas, if you're not in Dallas, you probably have no idea what that school is. But SMU is actually a really big deal if you're here in Dallas. They have a really, really great alumni network. And if you want to be in big law here in Dallas, you probably should have gone to SMU. So I think it's really important for you to note. And the only way you're going to be able to find out any of those things is if you talk to an attorney and ask them, what's the reputation of this law school in this practice area? These are the schools that I'm thinking of applying to. What do you know about these schools? Did you go to any of these schools? They might be able to give you the inside information on some of those schools, what classes to take or what opportunities you should look out for when you're there. That's the reason we want you to talk to attorneys. And I promise they're not scary. They will not bite.
Such a good point, because law school admissions is so numbers driven, and law school admission officers are also incredibly numbers driven, all based around the rankings. They suffer from what I call runt syndrome, rankings under numerical threshold, where if they rank below the numerical threshold that an applicant is looking at, like an applicant wants T14, or they want top tier, or they want top 50. If a school's below that number, they're worried that applicants won't apply there. But if you, as you point out, the regional reputation can matter more. If you plan to stay in Texas, or you plan to stay in California, or you want to be on the East Coast, all of those things matter a lot. A law school's reputation is higher in its region than the national rankings would lead you to believe.
Yes, absolutely. And the practice area is really important because, listen, I went to a law school in the middle of New Hampshire. Most people never even heard of it. And you wouldn't, unless you were really interested in intellectual property law and you realize, for some reason, there's a top 5 intellectual property school in the middle of Concord, New Hampshire. And, I think a lot of people wouldn't even know that existed. And so that's why I say talk to practitioners, figure out, which schools they would recommend, because you might be able to get a perfectly good degree with, every single extracurricular activity that you wanted from a school that is half the price of one of those, top tier law schools that you're going to go $300,000 in debt for. So, my law school gave great scholarships, and, you could get out with half the debt that you get in most law schools with a great degree. We have, alumni all over the place in intellectual property. So, I think the law school's reputation is just really well known, and the alumni go out of their way to try to get you jobs. So, so look for schools like that might be really good value schools because of the practice area niche that they cater to. There are certain practice areas like maritime law, or like intellectual property law, or now, there's new specialty areas in social media, privacy, all these areas that didn't really exist when I was going to, law school, or at least weren't popular when I was going to law school. Might be opportunities for you to set yourself apart if you can make yourself the go-to person in those areas.
Totally. So what I'm taking away from you here, just to break it down for a second, if you talk to a mentor, then you could discover a law school that ranks especially well in a certain practice area beyond what the national US news rankings would lead you to believe. As a result of that, you could then get a reasonably high LSAT score, go to that lower ranked law school for a full ride, or with significant scholarship money, because you're getting a bargain given that this school ranks highly for your practice area, even if it doesn't rank that well nationally.
Absolutely.
And then you go to that school, you graduate with little to no debt, and you can write your own ticket wherever you want to go for a career.
Yep. Exactly.
Amazing.
That's exactly what I did. I applied to those 8 schools that the attorney recommended, and 4 of them were T14, and I got accepted to some of them, and I was not going to pay that cost. I mean, I was funding my own law school education. I didn't have parents who were willing to pay for it. I didn't have, I wasn't independently wealthy, so I mean, I had to really think about those numbers. Oh, and what law school did I go to? Oh, University of New Hampshire School of Law. Back then it was called Franklin Pierce, but now it's called UNH Law. And they have all sorts of interesting programs now. They have a hybrid JD program that's actually half online and half live. So you can actually still work and go to law school at the same time. But yeah, it's a great school. I would highly recommend it to anyone. And if you want to know more about it, feel free to message me on LinkedIn because I'm happy to talk about it. What other questions should you ask admissions counselors? So this is a tough one because I feel like in the same way that you said that admissions counselors are numbers driven, a lot of admissions counselors are going to always talk about the best things about their school, but they may not mention the worst things about their school. So I think that while you should ask a lot of questions to admissions officers, like what extracurricular activities does your school offer? What are the main specialty areas that, they have unique programs in? There might be some really amazing clinic, like a immigration clinic that does work with detainees or something that you are dying to do, and that might only exist at one law school. So ask them those questions. But as far as other things that I think you should be doing is message the students on LinkedIn. I would guarantee you now law students all have a LinkedIn as well. So reach out to students at your current prospective law schools, the schools that you think you want to go to, and ask them hey, now that you're there, do you still want to go there? Because I'll tell you, some of them will say no. So I think that you reach out to people and ask them hey, what do you like about the school? Do you think the school actually does try to help you get a job? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, guys, getting a job. So if your school, there are some schools out there, I won't name any, but if you rank in the bottom half of your class, they will abandon you. They will not help you get a job. Good luck, buddy. See ya.
And you could also lose the conditional scholarships based on ranking in a certain part of the class, top third.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they might bend over backwards for the top 25% of the class in trying to get them jobs because they know they can place them. But the rest of them, they might not have time to get to them. So, I mean, ask those people. If you think there's a good chance that you may be one of the middle of the road folks, I mean, listen, law school is competitive, right? So there's a lot of people in the room that have always been the smartest person in the room, and now they're all together. So, so I think a lot of people don't realize, hey, if you apply to a school where, your LSAT score and your GPA are such that you would be lucky to get in, and once you get in, now you're competing against all the people that have the better GPAs and LSAT. So, you have to think about how are you going to get that job afterwards. So, talk to the people who are at the law school and talk to people who have graduated from that law school and ask them, what were your prospects for getting a job? How did you find your first job? How did you find, jobs in the summer? Let's see, my LinkedIn. Oh, I'll send you that link as well. I'm trying to catch up on all the comments here. If you're trying to get into something like private equity law, should you work before going to law school? That's an it depends question. I think it's going to be really hard for you to find an internship in private equity before you go to law school. That being said, I think there's ways that you can network with attorneys enough that they might be willing to give you a shot. And there are some really large law firms that offer fellowship programs where you might be able to dabble in something like that. Because private equity is something that you'll see at a lot of big law firms. And honestly, the only pre-law fellowship programs that are out there right now are mostly offered by big law. So you might be able to find something there. Do I think you should work before going to law school? I would highly recommend it, but I do recognize there's a good chunk of you that aren't going to listen to me. I know that there's many of you that are like, I need to go to law school right now. And I get that. I do. I was impatient myself all the way through undergrad, but then when I got out of undergrad, I worked for 2 years before going to law school. I thought that was really important because, one, it totally changed my perspective on how to interact with professionals. If you go straight from being a college student straight into law school, you are going to feel really out of your element when you are at networking events and trying to work that room like all those people who have networking experience. That's not to say that you can't get it, but it's just going to be a little nerve-wracking. So I think, it's really important for you to think about who you are and whether taking a break would help you or hurt you. If you are the kind of person that you can afford to take that break and work and, really learn more about the practice of law before going to law school to clarify your goals, then take that break. If you're the kind of person that you know that you're going to be demotivated by the break, and you're like, as soon as I stop taking tests, I never want to take them again, then don't take your break. But I do really think it's important in any event, even if you don't take the break to work, connect with attorneys. I cannot say it enough. The main reason why I would say take that time to work is to learn more about the law. But if you can do that without having to actually work, then maybe you'll be all right. As far as what impresses law schools, anything besides grades and scores, there's all sorts of things that impress law schools. But I think having a unique perspective is important. One of the things that I talked about in my personal statement was that I, came from a background that was, advertising. It wasn't anything like what most people do before they go to law school. I worked for an ad agency, and I had just, I think, a different perspective than most people. I didn't go straight out of undergrad. And, I talk about that a lot because I think it's important for you to show that law school, what are you going to contribute to the community there? So that's one of the things that they're looking for in your diversity statement. That's what they want to know about. What's your unique perspective that you bring to the table? So let's see, what other questions do we have?
We had some on the LSAT from earlier. I want to make sure we knock out before we wrap up here.
Sure.
So let's see. Advice on canceling an LSAT score. Would you explain why in an addendum to a law school? If you have just one cancellation, it's not a big deal. Even 2 or 3 is okay, but really three or more could start to look like you're a little bit flaky, like you're not really taking the LSAT when you're fully ready to take it. So, which could exhibit poor judgment or just not fully thinking it through. So one cancellation, no big deal. But if you have more than a few, I would write an addendum and say, one time the digital LSAT tablet malfunctioned, or one time there was a fire alarm that went off, or one time I was sick, or I got bad advice to take it just so I would see how I did, that sort of thing. High LSAT, how much can a high LSAT score and good recommendations and such compensate for a relatively lower GPA? A lot. The LSAT is the biggest factor in the law school admission process, then your GPA, then pretty much everything else. So a super high LSAT, it could compensate for a relatively lower GPA. And yeah, you could still get into a top 14 law school. It's kind of funny how just one day, performance on one day can counteract everything else, but that's how it works. So put a lot into it. Most people want to study for the LSAT only over 2 to 3 months, but it really takes 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential. And to circle back to that question on things aside from LSAT and GPA, do they matter? Yes. Personal statement, diversity statement, resume, rec letters, all of that matters, but not nearly as much as the LSAT. It's numbers driven. That's just how it is. It comes back to the rankings, like I said earlier, the runt syndrome, rankings under numerical threshold. As for best review books, best free resources, the LSAT prep tests are the best source of actual LSAT questions. Most of them are available in books of 10 on Amazon for about $20, $25. On my website, the LSAT blog, I also have guides, cheat sheets, checklists, explanations, and full video courses for every section of the exam. There's also the Khan Academy as a free resource in conjunction with the Law School Admission Council. The material itself is not as great as it could be. It's more like a set of questions and explanations rather than a cohesive system, but they do provide you with 11 free practice tests online, on the website, on mobile. So those are great to use. There's also 3 exams in the digital format on LSAC's site at familiar.lsac.org. I will send out a link to my website and the free resources after this session. Everything I have, the YouTube channel, the podcast, the Facebook group, the Instagram, all of that. As for maximum times I recommend taking the LSAT, I would say probably 3 or 4 is the most I'd recommend. 5 or 6 starts to look a little bit, again, flaky, like you're not totally ready and exercising good judgment when you take it. Is getting 1 high score better than taking it 3 times to get that high score? Of course, even though they don't average multiple scores and they only take the highest, it's still better to get that in 1 shot than 3 shots. But if it takes you 3 shots, it's okay. You gotta work with what you have wherever you're at. And if you took it before and got a lower score, so be it. No big deal. All right, I think that was all the questions that we had to run through here. Anything we're missing here?
I don't think so. But yeah, feel free, guys. Just we still have a few minutes, so go ahead and ask anything you'd like. I put down a link to our mentoring program and how you can sign up. Oh, actually, nope, that's the wrong link. Let me correct that real quick.
Yeah, sure. I'll include this in the email afterwards as well if you just send it to me, Angie.
Yeah, totally. I will send you, and I'll send you those other follow-up things that I promised to, the fellowship and internship spreadsheet, and then the questions to ask your mentor.
Sweet. That's awesome. It sounds like you've really broken it down systematically.
Yeah, we try. I mean, honestly, the last 2 years of just working on this and meeting with so many students and meeting with so many attorneys and realizing, like it's hard to reconcile that difference in experience. So, we had to find ways to really help people build these very human relationships at the end of the day. And, we're not really like, the Match.com for mentoring, but in a way we are. Like, you are kind of coming together and online, but then trying to build a very human, real relationship in real life. And so I think it's really important for students to find methods to connect with attorneys like that, even if they don't join our program. Go find a bar association that has those opportunities. Some bar associations do offer mentoring programs. There's also other ways that you can meet attorneys is to, reach out to, Inns of Court. I didn't know what an Inn of Court was when I was a prospective law student, but I'll just type these out for you guys so that you can kind of do your own research afterwards. But almost every city has a few Inns of Court that you could reach out to, and then almost every city has bar associations, and there's also usually state level bar associations you can reach out to, so I'll type those in too.
Awesome. Great. So I'll try to include those in the email afterwards as well. So just once again, before we sign off, what's the best way to get in touch with you, Angie?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or feel free to email me. I can drop my email too.
Awesome. And folks can find me, Steve Schwartz, through the LSAT blog, as well as the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And of course, reach out to me personally via email as well.
And we have all social media channels as well. So we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. So reach out to us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for asking great questions. Thanks, Angie, for sharing all your insights as well on the mentoring. Please keep in touch with us, everyone. Feel free to reach out to us if you need anything at all. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.